I call this debate to order. The resolution on the table is resolved. The DOJ has the integrity to carry out fair indictments of political figures. Resolved, the DOJ has the integrity to carry out fair indictments of political figures. I am looking for a first speech in the affirmative. Gretchen, you have up to 4 minutes or so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay. So I realized in thinking about this topic, there are certain statements that I basically take as given. The first is that when a crime is by a political figure, they are or should be under more scrutiny because of their visibility and power. So visibility will always increase scrutiny. And in the case of people asking to serve the public, they are asking for the public's trust. Political figures are asking for even more. They're asking for our votes. So to the extent that they're given visibility and power, I would hope willful misdeeds are indeed scrutinized and brought to the attention of constituents, our citizens affected by that individual's public service or missteps. And if it's material illegal, it should be prosecuted. The second thing I take as a given is that the opposing party will always be politically motivated to elevate an opponent's legal issues or scandals. Right now, the amount of time members of each party spend acting like tattling 6-year-olds is depressing me. And I guess as a corollary to that, the media, whether it's news or social media, sort of all of it, they need clickbait. Getting me to click, not keeping me actually informed is how they earn their money. So basically, I try not to listen to either of those groups too heavily. I try, anytime I realize someone is trying to get me by playing to my emotions, especially like anger and fear, instead of, trying to talk to me logically, I'm going to try and pull back and find a better source. So that's just my background on this topic, where I'm coming from. Okay, so then the question becomes, if a political figure does act inappropriately, or even worse, illegally, what would that look like? And should we look the other way or hold them accountable? And I'm assuming all of the participants this evening really want to be a person of integrity. And as I've already said, someone asking for my vote, I'd hold them to an even higher standard. Don't get me wrong, they're human, they have normal human flaws, they have history. Their history may even go back to times when we had different perspectives on certain issues. I don't want anyone wasting my time trying to find a small molehill and make a mountain of it. But willfully abusing trust and power, we need to pay attention to that. And those situations are complex and multifaceted. They're not simple, they're not black and white. What I can see and understand as a layperson, even if I really try to study the issue, is at best superficial. People whose job it is to understand the situation will know more than I will. Furthermore, it should be a group that is not politically beholden. At the federal level, that's the job of the DOJ. Not a few political appointees who get covered by media, but career civil servants. So if you think about the Justice Department and really federal departments in general, they have different types of employees. There are political employees who are changed every administration. Sometimes they aren't even around long enough to understand the organization. And they're usually the ones getting media coverage. Then there's a lot of support staff, administrative assistants, maintenance services, food services, probably most, certainly many of them are actually contractors. They're not employees of the federal government. Okay, so the real meat of each of the federal departments are the professionals who do the work of the agency or the department. For DOJ, that means lawyers who are the world's experts on USA federal law. Most of them, virtually all of them, are foregoing much higher salaries they could get at private firms. They are civil servants, and they're doing it because they hope or believe that the job they're doing at DOJ is the most important work they can do. And they do it across multiple administrations. Their jobs are relatively secure to insulate them from any political bias of the political appointees. The lawyers at DOJ now are the same ones who were there when Trump was president, and for many of them, they were there through Obama and George W. Bush. Many will be there 20 years or more. So as a quick proxy for their integrity and nonpartisan work, I looked at a Wikipedia page titled List of American Federal Politicians Convicted of Crimes. Kid you not, list of American federal politicians convicted of crime. And then just at the legislative branch. Under Trump's, 3 Republicans were convicted, no Democrats. Under Obama, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans. Under George W. Bush, 4 Republicans, 3 Democrats. My point is that the list of people convicted for federal crimes in no way correlates with the political position of the president who's in power at the time. So if a political figure is suspected of illegal activity, I want them investigated by a legal team that is expert on the pertinent law and independent of partisanship. It should be an independent body, but you're not going to get that by having a partisan body appoint someone. The most competent and independent body available is the career civil servant lawyers at the DOJ. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Jazz hands for our first speaker for giving us some interesting backdrop for all this. Also, it is modestly amusing that there's a Wikipedia page entitled what you said that the Wikipedia page is entitled. I am actually going to Google that soon. So, all right, let's go to questions for the speaker. Do we have any questions for the speaker? Please show us by show of hands. Questions for the speaker. Let's go to Deborah Baber. Did I pronounce that right?
You did, long A, Deborah Baber. I'm curious if the speaker knows the approximate number of civil servants or government employees, civil servants throughout the United States, what that number is.
Thank you.
I have no idea, but it's probably big enough to make both of us go, whoa.
As a very quick point of clarification, there's been studies that show that since about the 90s, there's been like 5 times as many contractors as there are actual civil servants themselves in government these days, which is just an interesting tidbit. So more of that soon. Let's go to further questions for the speaker, and let us take a follow-up actually from Deborah Baber.
Thank you. About 40% of the workforce is paid by our tax dollars. And one can look at that as we pay the taxes, our taxes, and we pay the taxes of the civil servants because they cannot pay their taxes without getting our tax dollars. That I think has some effect on the nature of the type of work that the various civil servants do. I don't have.
This is an important point. Would you mind adding a question at the end of it, though?
Sure. The question I would have is, do we believe that a civil servant has at their core work ethic the same sort of work ethic as someone in private industry or a business owner?
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Okay. So the federal government and any division within the federal government is a group of people, and they are people. Okay, so I'm not going to say that they don't have the imperfections that you would expect in any.
I wouldn't expect imperfections from any.
That anyone would expect in any group of people. Thank you for the correction, Mr. Chair. So, and my personal experience, okay, because I was a federal employee, not in DOJ. My personal experience is the federal employees who are on mission. All right, so that's the lawyers at DOJ, the doctors and scientists at NIH. They are doing the work of the mission of the department / the agency. They tend to work long hours, and like I said, they are paid less than they would be paid if they left the agency to go work elsewhere. So my experience is that their work integrity is as good as it gets. And I will say further that they are very aware they are being paid with taxpayers' money, and they are working for the taxpayer. I know that's not what the press or some politicians like to portray, but that's my experience of the reality of federal employees.
Thank you. Let's take a final question from Bill K.
Thanks. I have long agreed strongly with the position that Gretchen articulated. So my question for Gretchen is this: what metric would you think is the optimal?
What metric would the speaker?
Oh, okay, right. Thank you. What metric would the speaker think would be the optimal metric to use to measure when the criminal indictment and prosecution of a federal politician has crossed the line from legitimate to political witch hunt territory?
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
An excellent and challenging question. I thank the questioner. I'm going to confess something. When I drive, I speed. Not dramatically, but some. I don't want to be pulled over. I don't want to be ticketed for it. I don't really think it's interfering with anything. And I think our political figures are in a situation where, again, they're human beings. They have human weaknesses. They have human flaws. So I expect some screw ups. I expect them to be in some situations where they have three options and all of them are ethically compromised, but they have to take one of them. In fact, I can see, I sort of feel like every time I listen to what Congress is doing, the people I actually really think are trying really hard, I still see them making decisions and taking positions and taking votes and things that it's like, because I feel like they have no clean way. I don't want to see all of that declared a crime and prosecuted. On the other hand, I think there are times people really do try. I mean, historically, if you look over, the 200 plus years of American history, there have clearly been times when people have sought to do something other than what they're supposed to do under their oath of office. And when it's clearly something that violates the oath or violates, criminal law, federal law, I think it should certainly be investigated. And then I think it's up to prosecutors to decide if there's enough there that it's indictable. I don't want them wasting my time. I don't want them wasting my tax dollar chasing every little thing. It needs to be substantial. And quite honestly, I would give serious weight. Is it undermining the rights and privileges of American citizens? Not a small group, but the general larger group, American citizens.
And with that excellent opening and excellent set of exchanges, the speaker and her questioners are thanked. Thank you, Gretchen. All right. With that, I am looking for a speech in the negative. Do we have a speech in the negative? Mr. Brenkel. George?
Hi. Okay, my speech is, I would say, not so much negative as maybe concerned or a little skeptical. I don't believe that the DOJ as a whole lacks integrity, but I do think that some of the top officials over the past decade seem to have been concerned more with political outcomes than with maintaining the integrity of the department they've led. Obviously, an organization's integrity is a composite of the integrity of the individuals that make up that organization. So, the DOJ's mission is to enforce the laws of the U.S. in a fair and impartial manner. And for the most part, I expect almost all the individuals in the DOJ have integrity and are committed to accomplishing that goal. But at the top level, we've got to recommend that they are indeed political positions. And we have witnessed in recent years that politics have driven the behavior of the DOJ at some of the highest levels. I'm just starting like in 2016, the way in 2015, the way James Comey handled both the Trump and the Clinton investigations, the Peter Strzok and Leka Page texts that went back and forth, Kevin Kleinsmith actually being convicted of deliberately altering an email, suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story, et cetera, et cetera. And the challenge is that each one of these events tends to undermine the integrity of the organization as a whole. And once trust is damaged, it takes a long time and a lot of effort to restore. So I think we as citizens should be concerned that politics have been shaping some of the decisions made by top officials more than commitment to the fair application of the law. As the first speaker mentioned, and I agree with totally, humans are flawed and oftentimes will do the wrong thing. Our leaders are not immune to human frailty. People appointed to the top of an organization are appointed and confirmed by politicians and therefore come under political pressure. We need to know that they will stand up to this pressure as necessary, regardless of the political outcome. The only solution I see to this is to make sure that we as citizens hold these people in these positions to a very high standard of personal integrity and remove them when they stray. So we as citizens need to take care that we demand first and foremost a high level of personal integrity from our appointed officials before we focus on any particular political agenda. Politicians and the media should not be trying to use the DOJ and the courts as political tools to gain a particular political outcome. That was it.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let's go to a couple of questions for the speaker. I just have a very brief question. Mr. Brinkle, I'm wondering to what degree you believe that the rule that you mentioned that politicians should not be allowed to use like the IRS, for example, or I guess the EPA or whatever for advancing shady political purposes. How can one possibly enforce that except through the process of politics?
That's a very good question. It has to be enforced through the process of politics because we're a democracy and that's essentially how things are supposed to work. What we do need is transparency. We do need to be able to see when potentially things are straying or when there's some evidence that there is, movement away from the kind of behavior we're looking for. And I think part of it is we as citizens have to focus and realize that what's important first is integrity and sticking to the mission, et cetera. And second is political outcomes. And often the way we look at whatever the case is, we look at it through a partisan lens. And that just bubbles right up from the way we vote to the politicians that we vote into office to the agencies that are there to do the government's business. And the concern with that is agencies like the Department of Justice have a lot of power to affect people's lives. And that power needs to be checked by something. And what it needs to be checked by most of all is transparency.
Thank you. Let's go to a couple further questions. Let's take one from John Tressiter. John?
Yeah, I have a question for the speaker. What are his thoughts when someone says that the Justice Department consists of nonpartisan career servants who are just doing their jobs?
Mr. Speaker,
so
rephrasing of the question?
I didn't catch the beginning. Nonpartisan civil servants who are just doing their jobs. What was the first part of the question?
Mr. Trezor, do you mind unmuting yourself and asking this question one more time?
Well, yeah, sure. My question to the speaker is, what do you say to a person who say that the Justice Department consists of nonpartisan career servants who are just doing their jobs?
I don't even know what I would say, but I'm curious what the speaker would say.
Well, first off, it's kind of hard to believe that anyone in this country is completely nonpartisan. They are civil servants. They are committed to doing their jobs. but some of them are Democrats, some of them are Republicans, some of them believe something and some believes the other thing. What's really important is whether or not they are allowing their personal opinions to affect the way they feel about things. It's an issue of very important, you know, whether it's a lawyer in the Department of Justice or it's a referee refereeing a football game. It's important that we know that person is aware of the fact that they have partisan beliefs and is doing their best to maintain the integrity of saying, I'm going to do this fairly. That's what I would say.
I personally would staff the government with nothing but Luke Nathan Phillips loyalists, so I can get whatever I want at all times, but I suppose I can't get that under the Constitution. All right, let's go to a question from Branche Brown. Branche.
I would like to ask the speaker, does the speaker feel that having political appointees that are very partisan in positions of leadership positions for a number of years, will that lead to damage to the organization for subsequent years later down the road?
So the idea of if someone is very partisan in one of those positions, does that kind of affect things going down? My thought is it can, particularly if you have someone in that position, say as Attorney General, who is very partisan in the way he approaches things, that's going to lead to a reaction. So sometimes, you know, that if that happens for too long, then you will get kind of a tendency to try and counteract that. And, you know, partisanship can lead to partisanship. So that's why I said it's important for us to make sure that we're looking for integrity and staying to the truth of the mission of the department over any particular political outcome. So it's up to us ultimately, because these people are appointed by people we elect. So we need to be very aware of that.
And let's go to a final question from Bill Kay. Bill?
Thanks. I'm wondering if the speaker has concluded that the federal indictments of criminal indictments of Donald Trump have crossed the line from legitimate indictments to political witch hunt territory? And if so, what metric the speaker uses to conclude that they've crossed that line?
This is a great question, and the chair is upon further speeches later on this debate on this subject, because this will go some interesting directions. But Mr. Speaker, your answer.
Wow, that is a tough one to answer. And part of it, let me back up for a second and say, in the process, and in the justice process in this country, part of it is the Department of Justice, part of it is to pursue an investigation, part of it is coming up with an indictment. But after that, there is a process, you know, again, the way our justice system works is you're tried in a jury of your peers. And so there is some give and take there. And all these indictments so far are just really the start of the process. To me personally, some of them, I feel that there are, you know, there is definitely justification for pursuing an indictment. In other cases, like what's currently going on right now in New York City is I'm a little less so, and I think might have crossed the line. I think Alvin Bragg has been very clear that he's approaching this very much from a political angle. But, you know, hopefully these things, and going through the entire justice process, will come out with a fair resolution, due to the fact that it's one thing to have an indictment. It's another thing to get all the way to a conviction.
And with that, the speaker and his questioners are thanked. Thank you all for this. Again, I will smile upon further speeches going into the specifics on these sorts of questions. Case studies, both contemporary and historical, are very much allowed. Additionally, I have been informed that the whips would like people to text them more. I get lonely too sometimes, and so I understand their their situation. So please, if you have questions or if you'd like to make comments or speeches, please be chatting to your webs. With that, I am looking for a speaker in the affirmative. Do we have a speech in the affirmative? Mr. Morton?
Yes. Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a long speech, but I had to ask myself, do we believe in the Constitution or not? And if we do, then we need to look beyond the person and the title and ask, is there sufficient evidence to bring a charge to trial? And if the answer is yes, then we must treat all offenders the same, regardless of title or stature in the community. And I think while it would be bad policy and encourage political shenanigans to allow duly elected representatives to be detained on the way to an important vote or from running at all, it's another issue entirely to allow criminal acts under the color of authority to take place. I think the timing is purely a matter of circumstance as far as when things come to trial, and using a campaign to avoid a trial would mean anyone could commit a crime and run for office to avoid determine the fitness for office of the candidate. I think it's essential, as we've heard before, that we have that transparency. And as with all citizens, the right to free speech allows any claim, true or not, to be made by politicians. In a court of law, perjury is severely punished, and there are evidentiary rules that must be followed. So experience tells me that a candidate charged with a crime would want to clear their name right away, unless the offense is an act of civil disobedience, in which case accepting responsibility for personal action would focus attention on the injustice that you want to highlight. It's not the DOJ, it's the entire process that determines the outcome. And while I know for a fact that there is a lot of systemic injustice, it tends to fall on the poorly represented, those with less skilled counsel. And this, in a higher case with higher officials, that's really unlikely to be the case. And so I would say that we should depend upon those who are at the department that are nonpartisan. I've known some U.S. attorneys that didn't register in either party while they were serving, and try to be as oriented towards the Constitution. As if you, to me, I have to trust people if they take a vow to defend the Constitution, that they're going to look beyond the individuals to the Constitution itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Please raise your hands if you have questions for the speaker. I have a quick question of clarification. It's not a clarification. It's actually it's pretty substantive. I'm wondering if the speaker prefers would prefer people who are partisan and openly partisan, and then who are appointed as political appointees to the DOJ or other agencies to be registered and open about their partisanship and their partisan leanings from the past while they serve in government, or if he would prefer for them to shed their and not register under their previous partisan leanings and go in as a nonpartisan or independent or whatever when in government, with no backdrop of that, regardless of how they actually operate, like just at the level of like how should, and I know there's laws about this, right? But at the level of how the labeling should be done, what does the speaker think about whether political appointees should have any partisan labeling whatsoever?
Well, I think individuals, we all interpret things the way we see it, of course, from our own life experience. And so to me, if you start out I think it should be nonpartisan while you're serving in the Department of Justice or something. Just to set the tone, I think it's more fair. But I think really if you're going to indict someone, you're going to be looking at evidence. That's what I want to see. And so if the evidence is there, I don't care what label their party is, because I can find that out on the voter registration real easy if that's what I want to do. That's how we target voters. So
Thank you. Further questions for the speaker? Let's go to, let me pronounce this correctly and tell me if I pronounce it wrong. Eric Easum.
No, that's correct. That's
Great.
correct.
Cool.
Mr. Speaker, do you believe that...
Mr. Chair, does the speaker believe?
Oh, Mr. Chair, does the speaker believe that purchasing power is a defining factor of the rule of law? And I want to expand on that question further. The rule of law is defined. Is it defined by criminal civil cases? Is it defined by the DOJ's Attorney General under the jurisdiction of that current presidential incumbent? Is it also defined by the Supreme Court? And is it defined by the Congress and Senate? Are all of those factors included together? And are they all influenced by purchasing power?
Well, that's an interesting question. I guess I'm trying to sort that out. I think as far as attorneys go, yes, there are different skills that attorneys have, and some are better in certain trials than others. As far as where the law comes from, laws are written, but after courts interpret them over time, and they become more and more defined as cases get brought before the court. So it's kind of those things are long-term decisions that are made in case by case. So that's why when I feel like someone's saying you're just picking on this person by trying to enforce a specific law, you have to go back and look, has this law been enforced before? How is it applied? What has the rulings been over the years? And all of those go into a case. But as far as attorneys, yes, I've personally experienced many cases where people had unqualified minimally qualified. They're not unqualified. They're a member of the bar, but maybe they haven't taken on criminal cases. They've done civil cases, or maybe they're brand new. And so the quality, as you go up and the attorney gets more experience, you're going to pay a lot more for them because you're paying for that experience and that knowledge. And they know.
I'm not paying for anything.
No, I know, but I'm saying if you're a defendant. So in that regard, yes, it is determined by purchasing power to a certain degree, the quality of your representation. And that's why when I see somebody at a very high level, I know the quality of those attorneys, they're going to be finding every possible argument. So I'm thinking someone at that level has a much better chance of being found innocent, even if they're somewhat guilty. So I think it does play a big role at that level. I don't think you can mix it all together, though.
Let's take a very brief follow-up from Eric.
Yeah, and the sense of time is money, as they say. So an attorney at the level of the DOJ, Attorney General, his time is extremely valuable. Taking on a case like one of the cases that involved any of the Black Lives Matter movements, the people that were affected on the ground level, of people that Eric Gardner, things of that nature, or taking on cases like Julian Assange. Which one has more effect to the rule of law? And is that determined by finance? Mayhaps. I don't know how to expand that question. There was something I was thinking, but it kind of...
I think
and Mr. Eastham, if you don't mind chatting the whips, I think you have a speech on this, so please feel free to chat the whips. Mr. Morton?
Yeah, that'd be great. No, I think really the highest paid officials don't try the cases in the state. That goes down to the U.S. attorney for the state, and there's other staff attorneys and all those people working. So it's the tone of what's important, I think, is determined, yes, by the top. Our civil rights cases at the top, our environmental cases at the top, those things are determined at a political level. But I think when you get to a criminal case, if it's an offense against a criminal offense, then it should be the same for pretty much everybody. I'm not sure if that really gets to where you were asking. I think it's a little more complex than that, but thank you.
The chair smiles upon all utterings of the phrase, I don't know, or I'm not sure, because the chair himself doesn't know a lot of things and is always happy to see that he is not alone in ignorance on various subjects. So thank you for that. Let's go to a final brief question from Mr. Sibelman. Ben?
Hi. I would like to ask, given that the speaker is very concerned with following the evidence, um, what, in the particular case of the DOJ's indictment of Donald Trump, what might be the consequences if if they hadn't followed the evidence, in and leading to an indictment?
Thank you, Mr. Morton.
If they hadn't followed the evidence, I think, well, it depends on which case. If we're talking about January 6th, then I guess history would be asking a lot of questions, and we have a right. There's so much controversy. I think the only way to solve it is in a court of law sometimes. I don't necessarily think somebody always has to spend a lot of time in jail, but we still have to answer the question. But if you're talking about the Mar-a-Lago case, where you're talking about potential secret documents, and I don't know what they are, it could be detrimental to our national security in a very major way. And that could be very dangerous. So,
and with that, the speaker and his questioners are thanked. Thank you all for being here. All right, I am looking for a second speech in the negative. Do we have a second speech in the negative from Mr. Brown? Branche, you have 4 to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question before us today is, does the DOJ have the integrity to carry out indictments of political figures? I feel the answer is, today we do not have a sufficient guarantee of impartiality in indicting political figures. I agree with the gentlewoman and the gentleman who argued in the affirmative that political figures should be prosecuted in the same manner as any other citizen. I suggest that the speakers are missing the key point of the question, which is regarding impartiality in the execution of duties. Being a federal government employee at the managerial or senior executive level requires the official to set aside their political opinions when executing their official duties. I believe there are 2 core ideas that are necessary to uphold the integrity of any institution. First, the ethical grounding and training of its personnel, and second, the implementation and enforcement of a robust framework that punishes violations effectively to discourage future infractions. Let's dissect these issues, beginning with the first tenet: the moral and ethical education of federal employees. I argue that we have witnessed a decline in the teaching of ethics and cultural norms necessary for the unbiased execution of federal DOJ duties. My claim suggests that there may be a generation of the DOJ workforce whose decision-making can be influenced by their political leanings rather than just their commitment to justice and truth. To uphold the law and to serve justice, one must possess a solid ethical foundation devoid of partisan ties, a foundation that seems to be eroding if we accept what's going on today. The second point states that the severity of punishment for violations of ethics and norms is grossly insufficient today. We live in a time where political affiliation seems to appear to overshadow the oath of office, where appointees are doing things that they think their party would like, prefer, or that they feel personally is good, and not sticking with justice. The consequences for overstepping ethical boundaries is a lack of teeth to deter misconduct. If punitive measures are not feared, what stops a conflicted individual from tipping the scales of justice to favor their political ideology? Is it the culture within the DOJ that has faltered, or is it external pressures that have seeped through its halls, damaging the moral fabric that was once its shield? I believe that there's a demonstrated deficit in nonpartisan integrity that disrupts the very essence of delivering unprejudiced justice. I'm not saying that there is no one of integrity in the DOJ. There are thousands of employees that are going there doing their jobs and doing them well. But with the infiltration of people that have these strong felt political beliefs and allow those beliefs to drive their decisions, their official decisions, it is hard to guarantee that any figure that's indicted is going to receive a fair trial. The essence of the debate is not to vilify or sanctify, but to critically assess and reaffirm or reinvent our collective commitment to justice. This commitment to justice should be blind of color, creed, and political dogma. The question is not whether the individual at the helm are directing the ship with steady, unbiased hands, but also if the vessel itself is sturdy enough to resist the tempestuous winds of partisanship. As we engage in this debate, let's remember that accountability rests on the shoulders of us as well as voters. The role to recognize the role and reinforce nonpartisanship in the people that we elect into offices. For it's the crucible of public discourse that strengthens our democracy, and the ethics of our guardian of justice are continually forged. I look forward to questions and more spirited debates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's go to a couple questions. Let's go first to Mr. Peter McCullough. Mr. McCullough?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you great.
Good. Mr. Speaker, when I signed up for this, there were two persons pictured in the advertisement, Donald Trump and Hunter Biden. My question for the speaker is, can he explain why he feels Hunter Biden was represented? Is he a political figure? And when was he indicted?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You may take that however you like.
I think the inclusion of Hunter Biden's photo in the lead up to this debate was probably not correct, because he's not a true political figure. He's connected to a figure by association. So I wouldn't let the inclusion of his photo taint the discussion.
Thank you. Let's go to a question from Mr. Zimowidlowski. Did I pronounce your name right? Mr. Lasky?
That's enough. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown indicated that he doesn't have the confidence in the impartiality of the Justice Department. And my question is, what methodology he would propose to determine whether or not some institution is impartial. Mr. Brown mentioned partisanship, that maybe people are appointed according to their political loyalties. But in my opinion, that does not necessarily translate into partiality. So I guess I find the concept a bit vacuous, because there seems to be no definition in a way that would allow any of us to sort of look at this objectively, or at least have tried to. So how do we determine this? Who is or is not impartial?
Mr. Brown?
Yeah, great question. It's a very challenging issue, I believe. When you look at how a lot of things in our government have worked, there's a lot of things that are based on cultural norms. That if you look back to the days of the founding fathers, there were duels fought because somebody impugned the honor and questioned somebody's integrity, and they had a duel. We do not have that type of standing up for your honor and feeling that I can't let this down today. So because some of those things were relied upon cultural norms that no longer exist, we haven't built in the proper regulations and procedures to do what the questioner asked. But we need to make sure that we start to do that today. And part of doing that is making sure there's an enforcement of the rules that are currently today, and a rigorous enforcement on both sides, devoid of what party and how the bias came in.
As an individual who would probably be dead in multiple duels by now, were that practice still legal, I appreciate many things about the speaker's answer there. So let's go to a couple more questions. Let's take one from Graciela Greenberg. Ms. Greenberg, please unmute yourself.
My question to the speaker is, how do we teach ethics or instill ethics?
Mr. Speaker.
That is a great question, and I think it's kind of a systemic problem that we're sort of broaching with degradation in ethics. Some of how you teach it will have to go back to our public education, how you're teaching children to interact with one another in school settings, and then as they progress in age, giving them more complicated scenarios and giving them examples. But in the interim, starting with just writing out regulations that are kind of have quantifiable metrics on how you're applying in this particular case at the Justice Department, how each individual attorney is applying justice in their particular area of responsibility. Do you have 45 cases against this party and 2 cases against this party when you had a total of 100 cases presented to you? Or is your balance within statistical deviations or variances?
By the way, I've been enforcing the no second person pronoun rules. I know most of the time you all are using it in the theoretical and collective sense rather than the individual sense, which I completely applaud. However, sometimes I like to poke fun at you all. And I, for example, have not received 45 or 100 cases anywhere, Mr. Brown. So let's go to one final question for the speaker. Let's go to Mr. Joseph Stein. Joseph?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for the speaker is, does he believe that the current Attorney General Merrick Garland and Special Counsel Jack Smith have shown partisanship in the 2 indictments of former President Donald Trump? And if so, on what basis?
Thank you.
My feeling about the indictments of former President Trump is I believe that there's sufficient evidence to have warranted the step forward to indict the individual in question.
And with that, the speaker and his questioners are thanked. Thank you all very much for these exchanges. All right, with that, we are going to go to another speech in the affirmative. Please raise your hands if you're interested in giving a speech. And just letting everybody know, I'm probably going to be shortening the time I give you for speeches moving forward, and we'll be doing a few less questions because it seems like there is a lot of interest in speaking on the subject, and I want to get as many of you in as I possibly can over the course of this evening. So let us go first to a speech in the affirmative from Belinda Barnett. Ms. Barnett.
Thank you. I should say, in full disclosure, I was a prosecutor with DOJ for 28 years. I was not involved. My component did not prosecute political cases. I worked for the Antitrust Division, which prosecutes antitrust crimes. So I'm in favor of the resolution. As Gretchen had said, the bulk of the work of DOJ is conducted by career personnel who are there from administration to administration. It is against the law to hire career personnel based on their political affiliation or their personal relationships. The hiring system of the merit system principles is based on competence rather than connections. It is also against the law under the Hatch Act for federal personnel to speak in favor of or against a candidate for partisan political office while at work or using federal equipment. There are several factors that promote the integrity of DOJ prosecutors. First, to be hired at DOJ, these career personnel must pass a background check. After being hired, the personnel must pass recurring background checks every 5 years. Also, there's the factor of institutional knowledge and expertise, which includes training. Many career prosecutors work at DOJ for their entire careers. They thus build up tremendous expertise, institutional knowledge. During these years of service, they must complete annual training on ethics and substantive prosecutorial issues, including new law and developing issues. They also generally complete additional training during the year to maintain their bar membership and for professional development. And state bars have requirements about training that often include ethics training every year. Over the years, the issues covered in DOJ training become ingrained in the DOJ career prosecutors, unlike political appointees who are generally at DOJ for only 2 to 4 years. I believe social media and some in the media have fostered a dangerous lack of appreciation for expertise in government and instead equated expertise to arrogant elitism or meaningless bureaucracy. There also seems to be a lack of understanding of what government employees do. Recently, I read a criticism of the supposed deep state, and the author asserted that anyone could do what government employees do. But think of other establishments. If you need surgery, don't you want an experienced surgeon who regularly receives training that updates his or her knowledge and skills? If your dog is sick, would you take the dog to an experienced veterinarian, or would you take him to your hairdresser? If you need a haircut, do you go to your hairdresser or your vet? You go to the person with the requisite expertise. In the vital area of law enforcement, to preserve our democracy and an orderly society, those with the requisite expertise should perform the work. Career personnel have an appreciation for the rule of law. Their job is to evaluate investigative findings based on the facts and the law according to the principles of federal prosecution, not according to a political agenda. And someone spoke earlier about transparency. The principles of federal prosecution are available on the internet in the DOJ Justice Manual. At a colleague's retirement party, I remember that she said that she had had the greatest job because her job every day was to come to work and decide in any given matter what was the right thing to do. Related to the issue of institutional knowledge, there are layers of supervision, which sometimes is referred to as micromanagement. In my component at DOJ, there are office chiefs, and above the chiefs, there are directors of enforcement, there were deputies, and at the top level, the assistant attorney general. All of those managers had to approve every investigation recommendation and every case recommendation. In addition, federal indictments are returned by grand juries, which serve as another check on the system. Grand juries are composed of 16 to 23 citizens randomly drawn from the district or the division where the indictment is presented.
Ms.
12 of
Ms. Burnett,
grand,
can you take 90 seconds to finish? 90 seconds.
12 of those grand jurors must concur in the indictment. Prosecutors present witnesses and documents to the grand jury, and the grand jury then votes on the indictment. Also, the trial jury is a further check on the system. And someone asked about accountability for prosecutors. If prosecutors violate the rules, they can be fired. They can also lose their bar membership. And so I would conclude.
And with that, the lady is thanked. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. This was a helpful and informative contribution to this. And as such, I'd like to go to some questions then. Let's go to a question first from Mr. Brankel. George?
Hi, this is, Mr. Chair, this is a general question in that there's been a couple times we've talked about you know, what sort of metrics can we use, et cetera. And in hearing some of the speakers thinking through this, we got to remember that the Department of Justice is just one part of the justice system. We have an adversarial justice system where there is a prosecutor and a defense, and there is a judge and trial by jury. Do we feel that that's fair? And would a potential good metric be in measuring prosecutors is their success rate in conviction? In other words, are they bringing cases where by the time we're done and we go through that adversarial process, they have a conviction rate that says they're not bringing frivolous indictments forward? Would that be a good metric?
Thank you. Interesting question. Madam Speaker, you can take it however you like.
It's kind of a tricky issue because it might dissuade some people from bringing tough cases. And the standard for bringing a case or recommending a case to the grand jury is contained in the principles of federal prosecution. And it's that the person's conduct, first of all, constitutes a federal offense, and that the admissible evidence will probably be sufficient to obtain a conviction by an unbiased trier of fact and sufficient to sustain a conviction on appeal, unless the prosecution would serve no substantial federal interest, the person is subject to effective prosecution in another jurisdiction, or there exists an adequate non-criminal alternative to prosecution. So sometimes you get what we call juror nullification. And so one of the factors I mentioned is that admissible evidence will probably be sufficient to obtain a conviction by an unbiased trier of fact. So, for example, if there were a civil rights case, I'm from Alabama, if there was a civil rights case in the 1960s against somebody who bombed an African-American site, and the prosecutor thought a white jury in Birmingham will never bring a conviction, but this case needs to be charged, they would charge the case, and it shouldn't be counted against them if they lost that case.
I want to get a few more questions in here because this is some interesting expertise in particular. And Ms. Barnett, I appreciate you helping us with like the legal particulars on all this. Let's go to a question from Susan Burnett. Ms. Burnett.
Hi, Mr. Chair. I would like to ask the speaker, I'm not a lawyer or a member of the DOJ, so a lot of the technical stuff escapes me. What I can just see from the evidence that I've seen, I would just like to ask the speaker if she could explain how there was a lack of an indictment against Joe Biden for removing classified documents from the White House when he was vice president, when that is known to be an illegal act. And that's one of the indictments brought against former President Trump, and why no indictment was brought against Hillary Clinton for knowingly spreading lies about fraud in the 2016 election, since that is another indictment that was brought against former President Trump. Can you explain how neither one of those could happen?
Thank you. Madam Speaker, you may address this however you like, but if you don't mind keeping this somewhat brief as well, too.
Okay. It's my understanding from what I've read in the media that the investigation of President Biden related to his classified in documents is still ongoing. So that is an unresolved matter. I will say that it appears from what I've read in the media that he has been fully cooperative, and that was not the case with President Trump. And also, I mean, the investigations of President Trump have concluded, and an indictment was brought. We don't know what's going to happen yet with President Biden's classified documents. As far as Hillary Clinton spreading lies about the 2016 election, I don't know what specific statements are being referred to.
I just want to let all future presidents of the United States out there know that if they ever have classified information that they need shuttled from one place to the other, I will never work for the United States government in any things of my careers, and I am more than happy to be a clean slate on that. So, yeah, this will come back to haunt me. But anyways, let's go to a further question from Jonathan Kaplan. Mr. Kaplan? Mr. Kaplan? Jonathan? Looks like Jonathan is muted. So let's go to a question from Bronche Brown. Mr. Brown?
Mr. Chair, well, I would like to ask the speaker a short statement with a question. I spent 20 years in the federal government as a federal employee. In the early days of my career, I worked with hundreds of people and I never knew anything about their political affiliations. With the growth of social media over the past 10 years or so, I would know a lot about people's political affiliations as they bring that into the workplace, where in the past, it just didn't come to the workplace to separate the two. My question is for the speaker is, in the speaker's time with the DOJ, had the speaker witnessed the same type of bringing political beliefs into the office? And does the speaker feel that that could have led to problems with impartiality?
This is a really interesting question. I appreciate that. Madam Speaker, take it however you like.
Yes, when I worked at DOJ, I retired in 2018. So when I worked there, which was from 1990 to 2018, I did not witness much political discussion at work because of the Hatch Act, which makes it's actually a criminal offense to speak in favor of or against a partisan political candidate at work or using federal equipment. So I didn't witness that much. And personally, I felt like when I worked at DOJ that I didn't have First Amendment rights because of my political speech was restrained. And I never put anything on Facebook about politics until after I retired from DOJ. There were, and this is an issue that's covered in training about things you put on social media, and if you're putting political things on social media and you're prosecuting a political person, which my component didn't do, that could be it could be a discovery issue. It could cause an indictment to be called into question. So there's just huge ramifications about prosecuting personnel. It could be an agent, not just a prosecutor, putting political things on social media, and that should not be done. As one example, as an aside, I had a very dear colleague who died in her 40s, and I found out her political affiliation right before her funeral. And I was actually surprised. If I would have guessed, I would have thought that she was a member of the opposite party. But I worked with her closely for a number of years, and I never knew what her political affiliation was.
And with that, the speaker and questioners are thanked. Thank you very much all for this interesting and illuminating exchange here. I am now looking for another speaker in the negative. I'm looking for a speaker in the negative, and I'm wondering if Deborah Baber. Deborah, you have about 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. the first thing to mention is that we are not a democracy, we are a republic. And when you read the founding fathers, they argued strenuously against becoming a democracy. And a good illustration of that is in the conversations that took place during the founding, when little Rhode Island kind of said to big Virginia, we're going to have to find a way to make this work for me in Rhode Island against you in Virginia, which can expand further west. And I am bounded already on all my sides with the ocean on the fourth. I think, too, that what we have, a big problem that we experience is that the phrase polite company does not talk about politics or religion has crippled our nation. It has crippled our nation because at the heart of every human society that has ever walked the face of the earth, politics and religion are at the core. And we are supposed to be a self-governing people. And if we cannot talk about those two major functions, those two major pieces in our human condition, then we cannot self-govern, which is one of the reasons I appreciate very much the braver angels and the attempts that they are making. The DOJ also, it is misunderstood. The DOJ is an executive branch department. It is by that alone, it can be viewed as a partisan branch. It is not part of the law system, the statute law system that exists elsewhere throughout the United States. And part of the difficulty that I have with this resolution is because the DOJ is part of the executive branch of government at the federal level, it is the furthest away from what our common law understanding about approaching justice needs to be in a nation that self-governs. Common law is derived from our biblical founding documents. Common law is further codified in statutes made at different levels of government. As a result, we also have in our nation, there are basically 33 enumerated rights for government. We as a people have been conditioned to believe that if it is not specifically written into a law, the enumerated powers, that it's assumed that governments can take those things on. The truth is that is explicitly incorrect. It is the inverse of what we have of our founding. We have been conditioned to believe that doctors are experts on our health, that teachers are experts on education, and that attorneys are experts on the law. That influences everything that we do. And once again, the assertion that any one of us on this meeting could perform adequately to spectacularly in a jury forum, a common law jury forum, is exceptional. I would offer as an example, if you are a speeder, as we have one of our speakers talked about being, if you are a speeder, if you are being judged.
I am, in fact, a speeder, so.
Exactly, and so the chair joins others as being a speeder. I am not a speeder, and I have very strong beliefs about that. If a speeder is on trial, would a speeder's peer group of jurors be other speeders or non-speeders like me who would judge their choices more harshly? And with that, I think that another question that we have that is a difficult one is, how do we decide what is partisan and what is not partisan? And once decisions are made about something being partisan, to what scale do we measure how partisan that is? And I would offer one last summation, and that is going back to some of the other speakers' discussions about culture. The first 100 years or so of our nation's founding, the American people, whether they spoke English or not, had one thing in common, most all of us did, and that was that we attended church, or in my case, synagogue. And we had as a basis for our understanding the world around us and our government, a Judeo-Christian biblical understanding of the world and the application of the 10 Commandments as it comes in to our legal system, So we should not be pursuing wins. We should be pursuing justice. And I believe as a partisan department, the DOJ there are serious questions about its ability to pursue justice on a political appointment. Thank you.
And with that, the speaker is thanked for this helpful contribution to the political philosophy of many of the things we're discussing here. This actually opens up some fascinating directions for this debate. So let's go to a couple of questions. Let's go first. Jonathan Kaplan, have you figured out how to get your mute work? Sweet.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you great.
Thanks. Question for the speaker or even the previous speaker. We've read in the papers this week and in recent weeks that former President Trump has said publicly that he plans to direct the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation to go after his political opponents, to investigate the current president, and to go after, quote unquote, radical Marxist DOJ prosecutors. So my question is that legal for the executive branch to direct DOJ to go after political enemies? And if it is legal, is it ethical? And is there an argument that justifies those comments that we're getting here? Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, you may take that however you like.
Thank you. It's a fine question, and I think though it is we live in a convoluted DOJ. We have for too long allowed for a corruption and a corrosion at all levels of our government to proceed. As a result, our ability to make assertions such as, in this case, is it ethical, is it not ethical, is deeply compromised. I also would offer as an observation, if you read in the newspaper something that was being quoted as having been said, and you did not go to the source itself, then I do question whether or not there was an editorial point of view introduced into the reading of the material from a newspaper or a media source versus going to the actual source. So it would be difficult to answer that question because I've not read the transcript in which President Trump made those assertions. I've heard snippets.
I haven't read that either. I don't follow politics, to be honest, so I can't help here either. Apologies. Let's go to a further question from Robin L. Miss Robin.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I would ask the speaker how we hold political appointees and elected officials accountable for potential crimes if we can't trust the DOJ, and further, if we can't trust any information that we read, except what we've experienced firsthand, how do we even evaluate evidence?
Thank you. This cuts to the root of the matter. Madam Speaker, you may take it however you like.
Thank you. Common law courts. That would be the answer. Common law courts.
All right. Let's go to a final question for the speaker from Mr. Eric Easum. Mr. Easum, you're still on mute.
Mr. Chair, Madam Speaker. So I have a hypothetical question here. You had referenced the basis.
She had referenced.
Oh, yeah, she had. Yes. She had referenced the founding of the nation on a Judeo-Christian, and it made me consider the concept of in the Supreme Court we have multiple members or judges that have specific denominations of faith, but it ties in. The question directly is, if the cabinets of the DOJ are multi-administration cabinets that go through multiple parties, would it be better to have a hypothetical system in which different councils of legal philosophical forums are subcontracted in the function of the role of the DOJ? So you have different councils of the different philosophical forums, positivism, legal realism, interpretivism, And then would it also be good to have the jurisprudence roles of different faiths, like the Hadith or the Talmud or any of the other branches of the Abrahamic tradition?
This is a really wild question, and I appreciate it for all kinds of geopolitical historical reasons. Madam Speaker, you may take it however you like.
Thank you. If I understood the question correctly, you're talking about outsourcing potentially the DOJ function to different legal schools of thought and or different traditions of legal practices or understanding. I think if I've understood it correctly, that kind of outsourcing. I think that once again, the problem with the DOJ, it's supposed to be dealing only with federal crimes or federal issues, that it is part of the executive branch, and the executive branch is charged with enforcing the laws that are on the books at a federal level in our nation. So the DOJ, if we have a partisan person in the White House, if we view them as such, human nature, what it is, will cleave or will likely surround themselves, himself, herself, with those that are similar of view. So while I think the idea of outsourcing to a particular set of beliefs to get could be a really excellent step in better understanding what is law, actually. It is not it's not about speeding tickets or not. Those are statutes. And we have a much better grounding of what is actually law versus what are the statutes to govern public interaction. And I think that big difference is something that most of us do not have a grasp of, which goes to the failing in our civil, in our school systems for not teaching the self-governing principles that are necessary. And in all major religions that I have studied, all of them have at their core as well, teach your children, teach the children. And we have in our nation, in my belief, abdicated too much of that responsibility to strangers who spend little time with the children compared to the frame of reference that child grows up in.
And with this heartwarming, patriotic admonition to children, the intricacies of Abrahamic, secular, and all other forms of law down to the very particulars, the speaker is thanked. And so are her questioners. Let's go to another speech in the affirmative. Please raise your hands. And I just want to let everybody know that I know you've been chatting to your whips. Chatting on your whips is to help them help me, but I will also only call specifically on speakers whose hands are raised. So just chair reconnaissance kind of stuff. So with that, let's go to a speech from Mr. Ed Ames. Ed?
Thank you. Let me take my hand down first. All right. So I've got a couple of concerns. First off, I wanted to take a moment and just post a quick question to the prior speaker, which would be which biblical founding documents. To my understanding, while the rank and file Americans were overwhelmingly Christian, majority Protestant, minority Catholic, the founders, with the exception of Adams, were by and large deists, and some of them were well-known figures of the Enlightenment. So biblical founding documents has a frame of reference there that is foreign to me. Well, I'm aware of it, but certainly I don't find good evidence to support it. Anyway, so in the affirmative, so DOJ is committed to nonpartisan justice. We heard that from a prior speaker. It must be. The rule of law distinguishes the West from autocracies, including Russia and China. In the West, laws rule. No one, no matter their wealth, social status, or political power, gets preferred treatment. In China, laws are subservient to the Chinese Communist Party. In Russia of old, the czars In today's Russia, Putin determines the law. So today we're looking at a new problem with administering the law. Red and blue don't agree on the facts. Each group, each tribe clings to their own truth and its own facts. So how are we going to determine if Trump is guilty when some believe it's a quote unquote witch hunt and he did nothing wrong and dismiss all evidence to the contrary, often attacking the sources that dare to bring it up? And others believe that Biden's laptop is got awful things. And then you've got other people who believe different things. So how do we deal without a common frame of reference? This is the elephant in the room that we have to deal with in so much of the problems we're facing today. Without a common frame of reference, how do we identify and punish corruption and other wrongdoing? If you can hide reality, if you can twist the social reality so that people believe what you want them to believe, then you can hide those moral and ethical questions. If you can say, well, I see all this evidence that so-and-so did this, but I don't believe them because they're a partisan thing and I didn't see it myself. And so therefore, I'm not going to believe it because I believe what my group believes, that this person has done no wrong. Then you're in some serious trouble. And I think we are in some serious trouble. And the thing about a nonpartisan justice system, it has to be based on facts and evidence. The problem is we don't agree on what that is. And I find that to be the worst issue that we have sitting at the core of all of this mess that we're dealing with. As soon as we can agree on the facts and the evidence, we can agree that corruption is a bad thing, that stealing from widows and orphans is reprehensible, that going around and buying a gun and not registering it and then turning it in before you decide to kill yourself with it probably means you played fast and loose with some laws and there may be some punishment there. These are all things we can agree on. But if we can't agree on the facts of what actually happened, even with a DOJ that is committed, as we heard from the speaker, to a nonpartisan justice, we're in trouble. Okay.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Let's go to a couple questions for the speaker real quick. Let's go to one from Mariah Barker. Ms. Barker.
Thank you. I am wondering if the speaker could talk a little bit about the relationship. Okay, so given the lack of this frame of reference or like this shared, that we can't agree on the facts, basically. With that in mind, could he talk a little bit more about the relationship between, I guess as the previous speaker put it, the experts versus the non-experts?
Thank you. Mr. Ames?
There's someone smarter than me who noted that in America, we've always had some who assume that democracy means that my ignorance is as valuable as the knowledge that you've spent a lifetime acquiring. So we do have that problem. Yes, you can have experts who are paid off, you can have experts who are biased, but when you start to get into complex issues, the average person doesn't have enough time to become an expert in everything. Because of that, we have to rely on experts. And ideally, those of us who have some expertise can cross-check them. And other experts who overlap, they can also cross-check each other. So I think you're asking, how do we deal with this? The question is, which experts do you believe? And if you only believe the experts that your tribe believes in, that your group, that the people who think like you believe in, there's a problem. Because there are probably some experts who do know the facts and are stating things that are true, but they don't agree with your tribe's beliefs. And I'm not hitting you personally. I'm saying in general, they don't agree with a particular person's tribe's beliefs. And at that point, they get dismissed out of hand. Oh, they're getting paid money for this. Therefore, climate scientists are lying because they get donation, they get grants to run the research. Nobody mentioning that the industry that's being criticized is making more profits than anything in the history of the world, which means they might have a reason to lie to you. But if you're in a particular tribe, you're going to bring up the argument and say, oh, look, these things say that these people were being paid money, and that means that they're biased, and completely ignore that the people who are on the other side of that argument are making money hand over fist and don't want to stop. So you've got to rely on experts, and you want to have enough knowledge yourself to be able to cross-check them. And you really have to leave your tribal and moral beliefs at the door. Truth may be tribal, but reality doesn't care. Our first job as a citizen is to understand what is the underlying reality. Once we know that, then we can apply our partisan filter. This is how I want the world to work. Given that this is the reality of how the world is right now, then yeah, sorry.
If you can,
I apologize.
Yeah, no, keep going. But if you can,
if I can, what quiet down?
No, if you can just wrap up your point.
Yeah, I mean that's basically it. That's our challenge. It's too easy to let your partisan beliefs drive. One of the hardest things I have had to let go of. I've been studying the roots of human violence since 9/11. One of the hardest things for me to let go of was the idea that people are rational. As soon as I let go of the idea that people think things through and understand why they act the way they do, the incredible, the awful, and the beautiful sides of human made a lot more sense. But I had to let go of moral judgments to say, oh, people do this under these circumstances. Not are they awful, but this is reality. Now I can apply my beliefs afterward. Yeah.
And with that, the speaker and his questioners are thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah.
I'm now looking for another speech in the negative. I'm looking for a speech in the negative. And let's go to a speech from Mr. Eason, Eric Eason.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, this is just a hypothetical after listening to this whole debate, and I had a conversation with my friend on the similar note about, oh, they indict Trump, they indict Biden, and we were relating it to the Julian Assange situation in the Fourth Estate. And I thought of this concept, and I typed it into the Chat GPT and see what it would say. And I said, what would be the possible effects of a requirement of continual indictment of every and all incumbent presidents? And it gave me a little rift, and I could just read it out real quick, but I would like to hear responses from people what would they think of a system in which any sitting president, any incumbent president would have to be in a continual state of investigation his entire run. What would be the logistical problems, and what would be the pros and cons?
This debate format cannot take your request under that particular thing, but when questioners ask questions of you after this, they're more than welcome to phrase statements in the form of questions that can continue that inquiry, if that helps. Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, you still there?
Yes. So I could read what this machine had postulated to me on the question. And it said one possible effect is that such a requirement would undermine the legitimacy and authority of the presidency and create a constant state of crisis and uncertainty in the government and society. Continual indictment would mean that the president would always be under investigation, accusation, and prosecution, and would have to spend a lot of time and energy and resources to defend himself or herself from legal challenges. This would distract the president from performing his or her constitutional duties and weaken his or her ability to lead the nation and the world. Continual indictment would also erode public trust and confidence in the president and the rule of law. and polarize the political and social factions. Continual indictment would also invite foreign interference and exploitation, as the president would be seen as vulnerable and unstable. I personally think that could be seen in another light. They're under a constant threat of criminalization. That might be a pretty strong thing to bear. Another possible effect is that the requirement would incentivize the president and Congress to cooperate and compromise more and to reform and improve legal political system. Continual indictment would mean the president would always be accountable and transparent to the law and the people, and there would have to justify and explain his or her actions and decisions. This would encourage the president to act more responsibly and ethically and to seek consensus and collaboration with the Congress and other stakeholders. Continual indictment would also motivate Congress and the courts to exercise more oversight, checks and balances on executive power, and to address the flaws and gaps in constitutional and statutory framework. Continual indictment would also stimulate the public's participation and awareness in the democratic process and foster a culture of civic engagement and education. And that's the speech there, but that was the question I'd asked it. That's what it responded back. I'm curious to hear what people that are more.
Well, you still have about 45 seconds if you have any like thoughts you want to add to what the robots spit out.
What it said, and as I brought earlier, the idea of having a council of a DOJ council, that had a very interesting response. Maybe I can read that out real quick, but
don't read that.
I'm not going to go that far, but that's the line of thinking I was going in the direction. If you had a reformed DOJ that could basically challenge and prove or disprove such concepts of, is this guy doing his job right? And then it wouldn't be so much of a, I don't know what you want to call it. That's all. Yeah.
Well, with that, the speaker and the artificial intelligence algorithm who assisted the speaker here are very heartily thanked. I also think, and Natalie, correct me if I'm wrong, this may well actually be the first time that we have had an AI-generated speech delivered on the floor of Braver Angels national debates, which the future is now. I'm taking it seriously in ways that I never did. So we'll see. All right, let's go to a couple of questions for the speaker, and I think these questions will close out our debate. The speaker requested that thoughts on this idea of continual indictment as being a pressure on the presidency, which is an idea that goes all the way back to Machiavelli in some ways. The speaker asked for people to share their views on it. I think the way I would like to do this is you're welcome to share your views if you can keep it in 3 sentences or less and end it with a question that the speaker can give an answer to in like the format of yes or no or something like that. That makes sense, everybody? So let's go to a couple of questions for the speaker. Let's go first to Tom Cook.
Yes, Mr. Chair. The question for the speaker would be, have we seen what he just expressed through ChatGPT in the form of a gentleman by the name of Donald Trump for the past 7 years has technically been under indictment or investigation continually, and how you think that fares for our country.
Also, Tom, if I'm thinking about this right, I think I remember you making a really good and heartfelt speech at the BA National Convention. So good to see you again after a while. Mr. Speaker, you can address this question however you like.
I think that can kind of be a positive. It has its positives and negatives to it. It's definitely kind of shaped a more active role in the political debate amongst people. Also really helps people define the boundaries of what they think and gives them more faith into what they want to say. And also, I mean, in the same concept, every president that ever gets into office, they get a residual income every single year for the rest of their lives, and they're protected by the Secret Service for the rest of their lives. So it might be a good thing because maybe one day the hammer falls and it's like, oh, this person actually did commit horrible treason against the nation. Well, should you be protecting them? Or if they get through and they, pass on with their life, they will be recognized as a great president, so that's how I would see it.
Let's go to a further question from Mr. Scott Foster. Scott? Mr. Foster?
Give me 1 second. There we go. Can you hear me?
Yep, all set.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chair, I had a question for the speaker about, it seems like, and I think it's not only the current speaker, but a lot of speakers have implied or talked about concerns about the DOJ and maybe the government in general about how biased it could possibly be. But specifically when it comes to the DOJ being weaponized toward presidents, I would just ask the speaker if he'd like to comment about the history of this weaponization, or to put it the question more simply, in the history of the nation, how have other presidents been treated similarly to Donald Trump, or has the behavior of Donald Trump or the things that he's chosen to do, during his presidency and before and after, contributed to this special treatment that he seems to be getting? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm not sure in the historical context before Trump, because Trump's in the age of social media, but I don't know, for some reason what popped into my brain was Hoover. And then also the classic, I forget if it was Roosevelt, I'm not sure who said, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. And the acronym for fear is false evidence affecting reason. So I don't think that answers your question, but that's my response.
As an old line Richard Nixon Republican myself, I have some ideas on other presidents who might be under question.
Really? Yeah, that didn't even think of that. Or anyone that's been tried to be assassinated. Any Reagan, for example, or I don't know. Yeah, that's brilliant. That very good, Mr. Chair.
Let's go to a final question of the night from Rita Chisholm. Rita, I love you. You're great. You're wonderful. You know what I'm about to ask. Please make it in the form of a question comparatively concisely.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to ask the speaker, Mr. Chair, and this was something that I was going to bring out earlier, but we haven't spoken about the optics of things. And I know that as a people, we're told not to worry about things, how things appear, right? As we're being brought up. And that was something that I was taught, that you can't always worry about what other people think. But what we're finding ourselves in, I think that for those that are willing to see the reality, the truth, big T truth of some things that we've seen, can we admit that having a president under constant, what you were saying, under constant jurisdiction or whatever, under the, what are the optics of that? And optics do, as much as we would love to say, oh, it doesn't matter, there are a lot of optics that I experienced personally looking for the first time as someone that didn't participate in politics very much, but there were so many optics that just really affected me as someone looking in. So how do we deal with the optics of how our government and those within it are running our country?
Mr. Speaker?
The first thing that comes to mind is you're guilty until proven innocent. Or innocent till proven guilty. Is that, never mind. Sorry, I got that mixed. But
I know what you meant. I know what you meant.
Well, I mean, optically on the world stage, like I was referencing, it's like if your leader is always criminal, and if you're living in a free nation of sovereign individuals, we the people, and we have a leader, it's kind of like, well, it's like what is it? There's too many Indians, not enough chiefs. I know that's really could be really bad thing to say in certain cultures, but also if every member of the tribe is an example of the chiefdom, it's kind of like, well, this is the person that increased the amount of fish we got this week. It's like, okay, that's different. So I don't know. I'm not sure. It would be strange optics.
May I do a quick follow-up question?
The briefest of follow-ups.
Okay, I'm talking about the specifics of, and I'm going to point this out as someone, and I will tell you, I was not a fan of Donald Trump. I'm a conservative voter, though, and through a lot of very difficult, heart-wrenching prayer and decision-making, I ultimately did vote for Donald Trump. And as someone that tries to be very fair with what I'm observing, I have to say that the moralizing that I seem to see going on between the parties, specifically the more liberal part, liberals toward conservatives, that seemed to be very hypocritical to me. The optics, I think, were that way to the world also. Do you have any comment about that?
I would agree. I think that's the nature of the experience we're presenting to the world. Because there was someone who quoted once, and I can't remember who it was, but they said something to the effect of, "The problem with the world is progressivism." And it's kind of a silly thing to say, but to some people it isn't. But then we look at the track of history. Well, we don't have arbitrary kings ruling over us. And if we look at the track of history currently, China and Russia, they're in much more, I don't know. I can't speak on there. I haven't lived there. I haven't experienced it. I get what the media presents. The optics they're fed to us. We don't get to watch RTTV. It's been banned in our nation, the free speech nation.
This having been an excellent series of speeches on a complicated topic and one which taught me many things, I think we have to close up for the night. So I am about to ask for a motion to adjourn, but after the gavel taps and we adjourn, don't go away. We have one last thing we have to do before that. So with that, I am looking for a motion to adjourn. Can somebody please move?
So moved. So moved.